Hi guys, it's Nick, the ASMR nerd, and I'm back with another relaxing review to inform the mind and soothe the soul. I'm really excited to be back at this, actually. It's been a little while since I've done one of these, but today we're looking at a very highly requested item, something that you guys have been asking for, and something that I am personally very excited to look at as well. Today we're taking a look at the Obens and Pro 2, which is a compact 60% mechanical keyboard. It's wireless with Bluetooth 4.0. It's got full per key RGB backlighting and a whole slew of other exciting and interesting features, which we'll be taking a look at here in a moment. And you might remember that the original and Pro keyboard, which I reviewed here on the channel quite some time ago now, became my favorite keyboard. It's my daily driver. I still use it all the time. And so it looks like the Pro 2 is set to remedy a few of the just few little issues that I had with the original and Pro, just some of those outstanding concerns. And so I have high hopes for the Pro 2. Really keen to take a look at it. And so the good folks at banggood.com very kindly sent over a review sample of the Pro 2 that we're going to take a look at here today. It's $90. Well, really it's depending on the model you go for. There's two versions of the Pro 2. One that comes with Gatoron switches, one that comes with Kailh switches, Kailh Box switches, and you have a selection of a few different switch types for each version. So it ranges from $80 to $90 anyway, depending on which version you want. But that's available, of course, over on Banggood. And if you want to check it out as we're going through the review here, there is a link down in the video description and also pinned in a comment. And clicking through on that link and purchasing the board using it actually supports the channel and what I do here. So if you're considering picking the board up and you want to support the channel, I would really appreciate it if you checked it out through that link. Another thing that I want to let you know is I'm doing something a bit different here today. I tend to do very long reviews. As you know, I don't like to rush things. And when I'm looking at a product that's as complex and feature-rich as the Pro 2, these reviews can become very long indeed, like an hour and a half. And that's an intimidating chunk of video, both for you to watch and for me to make. So what I'm trying with this video is I'm splitting up the review. What you're watching now is part 1 of my Obens and Pro 2 review. It will include this introduction, an unboxing of the product, and a thorough inspection of the product, the pack-ins, and the packaging and all that stuff. Part 2 will include looking at the software for this keyboard, the RGB backlighting functionality, a typing test, my subjective opinions on using the board, and then a summary of the pros and cons before the final conclusion. So that will all be in part 2, and that will be following along in about a week or so. You'll see it on the channel here when it appears, and I will also update the video description of this video with a link to part 2 once it's out. Hopefully that makes this all a little bit more digestible, a little bit more manageable for all of us. So, with all that said, all that housekeeping out of the way, let's dive on in and take a closer look at the Opens and Pro 2. So here we have the An Pro 2 in box. And as you can see, I opted for a slightly different aesthetic option this time around. I got the white version of this board. As you can see, it comes in a very smart, clean looking white box, like so. I suspect many of you will prefer the black version. It does come in black as well, because black tends to go with a wider array of PC gaming peripherals and things like that. But I really liked the look of the white version. It's just so clean. And I also thought you might like to look at something a bit different. I get a lot of black and gray keyboards through here that we look at, so this is a little more visually interesting, perhaps. So, as I mentioned, the packaging is very clean and minimalistic. Over here it says An Pro 2 right at the top. Below it says 60% dual mode mechanical keyboard. A picture of the board right here, and then down below this funny kind of catchphrase: keep doing the same thing, make change. So I guess they're trying to suggest that even though you're just typing, maybe like you always do, that this keyboard somehow changes it. I don't know. That's all I can figure. Little Opens logo up in the very top corner here. Otherwise, nothing on the front. Very, very clean. Nothing on that flap. The Opens Lab logo over here. And Pro 2. Same label there. Just a barcode and such over here. Opens Lab on this end. And the back. The back is where all the action is at. The packaging does appear to do a good job of explaining what's inside, which is nice because a lot of them, the budget boards that I get in here, I don't see a lot about what's inside. You could argue it's not so important because you should know what's inside because you ordered it, but I like seeing some literature on the box myself. So it says here, Magic Function Key. This is one of the features that they advertise, which is that the caps lock key acts as both a caps lock key as well as a secondary function key that mimics the functions of the dedicated function key, of which there are actually two on this board. It's a little confusing. We'll talk about it more later, but it allows easier access to secondary function layers. That's the idea. It also says double function here, which is referring to the fact that there are two function keys on the board, again allowing a wider array of secondary functions on those keys, two separate function layers. It says tap key over here. This is a really interesting one. What that means is that there are certain keys on the board, specifically the keys in the bottom right corner of the board, or sorry, bottom, yeah, bottom right corner. Everything is different on the camera screen. It's mirrored anyway. Those keys, when they're held, they do one thing. When they are tapped, they function as arrow keys. And so you don't even have to hold down a separate function key there, which is great. At least in theory. We'll find out, I guess, if it's great in practice. Full RGB backlight, of course. Offline macro, up to 16 groups offline macro programs. So that's onboard memory for storing macro settings. And software control center. Multi-platform software makes customization easy. And to create the most complicated lighting effects in seconds. So this, as I said, is the white model of the board. This board also, as I mentioned, comes in 2 switch flavors. You can get it with an array of Gatoron switches or with an array of Kailh Box switches. My Pro original I got with Gatoron Browns, which are lovely switches. But I wanted to try something different this time, so I went with the Kailh Box Brown switches. You might remember that the MotoSpeed CK61 60% board that I looked at a few months ago came with Kailh Box Whites, which are very tactile, clicky switches, and I liked those a lot. The Kailh Box Browns are the tactile sort of in the middle switch of the Kailh Box series, so they're not as clicky as the whites, but they're not linear either. They're the equivalent of a Cherry MX or Gatoron Brown. That's the idea. They have a tactile bump, and as a fan of those kinds of switches, I'm very excited to try them out on this board. We'll see how they stack up. You can see that it does say that down here. It says brown switch right there, Kailh Box. And there's some other information about the board in both Chinese and English here, talking about the contents of the package, I guess. Product size, package contents. It says on the box here, 1 year limited product hardware warranty. That's great to know. I love it when they put that information either on the box or prominently inside. Very cool. Alright, well, I'd say it's time we open this up and take a look at what's inside. Okay, so we are greeted with an Pro 2 quick start guide. And otherwise, it's pretty clean and uncluttered in here. The keyboard is protected in this typical kind of foamy bag, and padded with what looks to be just cardboard. No dense packing foam or anything, but hopefully that's proved adequate. So there's the board. We'll take that out in a second, take it out of the bag and look at it closer, but let's look at what else Obens has packed into the box here. I will say this is heavy. It's very heavy for a 60% keyboard. That's because there's a 1900 milliamp hour battery in there to provide ample battery life. That's the idea, anyway. Nothing else apparent in here, but I'm willing to bet that if we lift out this, there we go. Oh, would you look at that? Let's just put that aside. That's great. Okay, that's great on a couple of fronts. One, we have a keycap puller, but it's not the usual clipping type. It's a wire puller, which is great. I love these. These are so much better than the standard pullers that you get. And so these just kind of go under each side of a cap, and then you just pull it up. I'll show you once we look at the board. But these are far superior. I mean, it's a cheap little thing, but it's a nice little pack-in to see. We've got an interesting choice of USB cable here. Obviously, this board has a removable, detachable USB cable. It is USB Type-C, which is great. I love to see that. It's a slightly more expensive connector, but it's reversible, which is great. And really, it's the connector of the future, so it's nice to see that Obens was forward-thinking. But this is red. This is a very bright red cable. It's coated in a PVC, it's a vinyl material. So it's got kind of a soft touch to it, slightly, I don't want to say sticky, but almost. It does seem to get dirt and dust clinging to it pretty easily. I don't know if you can see that, but so hopefully that doesn't mean it's going to look ratty too easily. But yeah, red cable with black housings for a white keyboard. That's an interesting choice. It's a bold choice. It probably looks pretty nice, but I would have expected a white cable. So anyway, not a problem per se, just interesting aesthetic choice. It comes with a Velcro cable tie there, which is nice, premium touch, and it certainly seems plenty long. I'd reckon it's about 6 feet or so, maybe 2 meters. Nothing special or bespoke about the housings, no logos stamped or anything, but still looks nice and sharp. Okay, well, interesting choice on Obens' part. And lastly, I am tickled pink by this. We have a whole set of keycaps for our modifier keys in different bright primary colors. We've got shift keys, function keys, control and alt keys in greens, reds, yellows. This kind of purpley color down here. I love that. That is a classy pack-in. Great way to throw a splash of color onto an otherwise very clean-looking board. And they don't have any legends on them, but they look to be nice and thick. And I suspect they are PBT material, just like the caps on the board itself. so that's a really fun little pack-in. Very nice. Alright, let's take a look at the board itself. Okay, so here is the board. Oh, actually, I know what we didn't do. We did not look at the quick start guide. Let's take a quick peek. Quick start, very blue. It says there's a Windows and Mac app. I guess you can go there. Oh, the full user manual is accessible at this URL or with this QR code. So this will probably be limited. Okay. Yeah, this looks like a very... talks about connecting via USB and Bluetooth. It's very diagrammatic. It has both Chinese and English on it, but it looks pretty simple. And the diagrams look pretty good. Bluetooth pairing, changing your Bluetooth connection. Here it looks like function keys, keyboard enhancement, yes, the magic function, and backlighting. So just some basic controls, really nothing too complicated here, but the full manual looks like it's available online, so I'll have to check that out after, as it advertises it is a quick start guide. Okay, but for real, let's look at this board. There she is. The Obens and Pro 2. Looking very, very sharp. All in white. Isn't that nice? The thing that I like about the aesthetics of the An Pro and the An Pro 2 is that they would look equally at home on a gamer's desk or in an office. It is not gaudy by any stretch, but the RGB backlighting can certainly spruce it up if you want something a little bit more colorful. I like the choice of the font. Once again, the legends on these keycaps. Just like the An Pro 1, it is a smart-looking font that's not gamery. It doesn't look like it's trying too hard to be edgy, you know. It looks nice. So, first impressions, very, very positive. It's very clean looking, very sharp. The case has the same design as the original An Pro. It's this slightly inclined design with these chamfered edges all the way around, which is a nice little finish. It's got these kind of angled undersides. It is made of ABS plastic. You can hear it there. And I remember on the original An Pro, it did feel a little bit hollow in some cases. It was a heavy board, but the case itself felt a bit hollow. Not so here. This whole thing feels very solid. You can hear. It all feels and sounds very solid. On the back here, our USB-C connector. reversible as it is. Let's look at the back, and then we'll get back to the look at the back, and then we'll get back to the front. So on the back, we have a big old Opens Lab logo, and below that it says AnPro 2, made in China, powered by Opens Lab. So I guess they're rebranding as Opens Lab. I'm not quite clear on that. They were Opens previously, but regardless, there's their branding. We've got a little QC Pass sticker here. We have 4 rubberized feet to prevent it from slipping around on your desk. It doesn't have pop-out feet, and that's because the case itself is designed to sit at an incline, so you're always going to have a little angle to your board. This board will not sit perfectly flat. I prefer to have a board that can do either, but this is the way the AnPro original was as well, and I can't say it's bothered me. It's just nice to have the option, but weirdly we've got, you see this? 01. I'm not sure why it says 01 over here, because this is the AnPro 2. Shouldn't it say 02? I don't quite know what's up with that, but it doesn't detract from anything. It's just a funny choice. But let's look over here. This feature is something I'm very glad to see. It's an on-off switch. Check it out. On, off, on, off. This is something that the AnPro 1 was sorely lacking. You weren't able to manually switch it off if you wanted to, while it was in Bluetooth mode, for instance. So I'm really happy to see a hardware switch on here, because other wireless boards that I've reviewed have featured it. It's just a really nice thing to have. It'll help you save some battery. So that's great to see. Alright, let's swing back around the front here. Something I'd like to show you is this. I'm just going to tip it up here. The secondary legends are all side printed, which is great actually, because the primary legends are all double shot, which means they're made of plastic, essentially, translucent plastic, and they will never fade. They are not decals or anything like that, or decals, depending on where you're from. And oftentimes what you see is secondary legends that are then printed as decals on just below the primary legends. But that's right where your fingers sit when you're typing, right? And so over time, they will wear out, those secondary legends. But by side printing them, they've moved them out of harm's way, away from the friction of your fingertips, away from those harmful finger oils. And I suspect these will never fade, because they're just never interacting with fingers. So we've got function 1 and function 2 buttons down there. We have a very subtle AnPro 2 logo, the branding here, which I love. Other boards will put it, front and center on their space bar, or in other places where it looks, just kind of gaudy. But this is so unobtrusive, so minimalistic, just looks, it's perfectly in keeping with the sharp, clean aesthetic of the rest of this board. And then you can see other secondary functions here: delete, insert, page up and down, print screen, those kinds of things. So that's great to see. And then, of course, the whole number row provides secondary function as the F keys, right? So a fairly typical layout. I've got the tilde up here on the escape key. A little bit different than the original and Pro, however. A couple of things I'm noticing are in slightly different places. But overall, I really like the aesthetic of this board. It is just so sharp looking. So, really great first impressions all around. As I mentioned, it is heavy. This is a hefty board. It said on the box, I can't remember, but wouldn't surprise me if it came in around a kilogram or something like that. And that's because there's a big old battery underneath this whole thing to provide many hours of Bluetooth usage. How many exactly? I am not sure. I will have to look that up for you and test it myself as well. But enough, I suspect. Especially important if you're going to be rocking that RGB lighting. That's a lot of LEDs to power, right? So let's take off one of these keycaps. You know I like to do this. And take a look at the switch underneath. So let's just go for the bottom right control here. So the way these keycap pullers work is you just kind of pop it over the switch like that, over the cap I should say, and then it sort of just slides up underneath the edges of the cap, and then you just pull and the cap goes flying off, exposing the switch underneath. So let's take a closer look at that cap for starters, and then we'll get to the switch. It is this PBT material, which typically these boards use ABS caps. PBT is just an alternative that people often prefer because it doesn't shine up as much as ABS does. After typing on ABS caps for a prolonged period, they take a sort of shine to them, and the texturing tends to start to rub off a bit. Not so with the PBT caps. So it's often associated with more premium keycaps, and this comes standard with that material, which is really nice. Very high quality caps. And you can see it's double shot. It's a little different actually than other double shot caps I've seen, in that it's not the entire interior that has the clear resin in it. It's just this top portion through which has the legend on it, so the light can shine through there. And then, of course, we have the switches. Our exposed switch right here. A Kailh Box Brown. Kailh being the manufacturer. Box because of this box structure that surrounds the stem. And brown because it's brown. It's the color they decided on for this type of switch, in keeping with the sort of Cherry MX style color coding. And the Kailh Box switches are purported to have a variety of advantages over Cherry MX style switches and their clones, such as better dust and water resistance thanks to this box structure, as well as less stem wobble. They're supposed to be more stable. for smoother action. And from the limited time that I've spent with these switches, somewhat limited, I did test the Kailh Box whites on that MotoSpeed CK61. I can say that I do think they succeed at being an improvement upon Cherry MX style switches. But these Kailh Box browns are something new to me, and I'm just pressing this one down right here. I will say it's very smooth. The tactile bump that this switch has sits very high in the action of the switch. It sits almost right at the very top of the key press, which makes it feel almost a little bit more linear than I would expect, because there's resistance right at the top, and then it's linear the rest of the way down. I don't know if I like that or not, but I'll have to test it out in some actual typing, and I will let you know. You can see, of course, the housing is clear, and that is to allow the SMD, the surface mount LED, to shine through, for that light to diffuse. But overall, it looks like a very solid little switch. I don't feel much wobble. In fact, I don't feel any wobble on any of these keys. They're very solid, a little bit there, but generally speaking, very solid. A little bit of wobble on the spacebar as well, but the action of that spacebar is actually very well stabilized. And they're very quiet, aren't they? Listen. The noise you hear is really just from the key bottoming out. You can hear it bottoming out onto the back plate, which appears to be, what, plastic or metal? Doesn't much matter, but I think it's a metal back plate, actually. Hard to tell. I'll have to take up another couple of keycaps. But either way, it is a white backplate, which should help the LEDs to diffuse and reflect very nicely for vivid colors. It was the same strategy used on the original and Pro. And last but not least, let's give the board the old flex test here. A tiny little bit of flex, but not much at all. It's a nice sound, isn't it? And if you didn't want to hear them bottoming out, you could put little O-rings on these guys, and that would quiet them down even further. So that's an option as well. All right. Well, I must say, initial impressions are all very favorable. These keycaps feel nice. They're thick. Nice thick PBT double shot caps, attractive legends, side printed secondary legends, dual function layer. Overall, just very aesthetically pleasing, very solid, very weighty board. Not much flex to speak of, and smart choices all around in terms of design, like the on-off switch. The slight incline in the case, USB Type-C, all very positive signs. So that is where I'm going to end part 1 of my Opens and Pro review. Part 2 will be coming up shortly, within the next week or so, and in it I will be looking at more of the functionality of the board, the backlighting, the software, and the key rebinding and macro functionality, the secondary function layers. I'll be typing on the board, sharing my subjective experience of these switches and using the board, and then I'll be wrapping it all up at the end with a list of pros and cons and my final conclusion, my verdict on the Ann Pro 2. So don't miss it. Make sure you come back for it if you want to hear what I think about this board in practice, not just looking at it, although it is very nice to look at, isn't it? Quite lovely. All right, my friends, thank you very much for watching part 1 of my Ann Pro 2 review, and I look very forward to having you back here next time for part 2. Bye for now, guys.